Welcome to Extra Blue. I'm your host, Elena Soneson. On this episode of Extra Blue, I welcome development coach for the U.S. ski team, Greta Anderson. Over the past several years, Greta has been quietly shaping the future of U.S. cross-country skiing. She works closely with Bryan Fish and the national team staff to support junior athletes, oversee camps, guide World Juniors and U23 athletes, and help strengthen the pipeline from grassroots skiing all the way up to the World Cup. A former Alaska Winter Star skier and APU athlete turned coach, Greta has spent her career working across club programs, World Junior trips, and national team development roles. She's known for her belief that happy people race fast, and that development is about building the whole person, not just the athlete. In this episode, we talk about what it really takes to develop world-class skiers in the U.S., what success looks like at 12, 16, and 23 years old, trends she's seeing in the pipeline, and where she hopes U.S. skiing is headed in the next 5 years. I hope you enjoy this episode with Greta Anderson. I'm really proud to be supported by Gear West, not just because they support athletes like me, but because they show up for the entire Nordic community. From helping kids learn to ski, to supporting high school and adult racers, to backing and participating in iconic events like the American Birkebeiner and so many local races, Gear West invests in what makes the Midwest Nordic ski community special. If you have goals on snow this season, whether it's your first race or a personal best, Gear West has the knowledge, gear, and support to help you get there. Stop by the campus in Long Lake, just a few minutes past Ridgedale. Greta Anderson, welcome to the Extra Blue podcast. I'm so excited to have you today. It's been a long time coming of us figuring out our schedules, but I am so happy to chat with you. And I just want to check in and see, how are you today? And also, where are you today?
Great questions. I'm doing really well. We are in Ulricehamn, Sweden, with the U18 and Super Trip group, which this year is 12 of the U18s and 1 U20 and 4 seniors. We just wrapped up in Trondheim, Norway, 3 races there for the Norwegian Cup. And now we're here this weekend for 3 of the Swedish Energy Cup races. So we'll have those Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Be fun.
Cool. And how were the races in Trondheim? How'd they go?
They were great. Conditions were much more consistent than we saw last year.
Nice.
Cold, so quite straightforward, fair waxing, which was a nice way for everyone to get their feet on the ground, especially with the juniors. It's really nice for them to get racing experience where skis aren't a make or break factor for what they're doing. And so to have fair skis for the whole field was about as good as you can ask for 3 days of racing, I think.
Yeah, awesome. I feel like I have only ever experienced Trondheim as being a total curveball every single day. So that's fun to hear that you guys actually had some consistent conditions and straightforward waxing.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, you mentioned that you're on the U18/Super Trip right now. And so
Yes.
this is the U18 trip is something that's happened, for many, many years. But the Super Trip is new. Typically, you lead a spring trip to Europe for what's called, in the past, it's been called the OPA Cup. Now it's called the FESA, FESA Cup. But can you explain to listeners just like, what was the OPA trip and why did you decide to try something new this year with the Super Trip? And what is the Super Trip looking like for you all?
Yeah, that's a question we've gotten a lot from the community, and it's been different every year since I started this job. So it's a good question to ask every year. U18 Scando Championship has been something, as you mentioned, we've done for a long time, 6 men, 6 women, and we go to race against the other nations. I actually just found out a few days ago that they did finalize, this is going to be the Scandinavian Championship. So we're doing the trip that we would do on a normal year anyway. So Estonia and Finland are here, Sweden is here, Norway is here, and we are here. And so we'll compete in those 3 events as not only individuals, but as part of the U18 team. Then normally separately after World Juniors, we do run that FISA OPA final trip that you've been on and had some wins on in past years when we did Zapata, I believe. But we looked at the calendar this year and it quite frankly didn't look that great for the FISA calendar. There were only 2 races. And so the thinking was instead of doing 2 races, we would try to get opportunities for athletes during the Super Tour break in the calendar to do 6 races. And because there's junior races offered at these 2 events and senior races, I thought, well, what if we combine both? And some other benefits there, in my opinion, are that we're able to carry a larger staff, which means the athletes have more support. And the other piece of it that I thought was really important was that the U18s are going to get to see firsthand what the senior racers, what you professional racers that are on the trip, what skiing looks like for them and what racing looks like. And so to have those good role models from the older athletes while they're offered also very high level international racing was a huge benefit this year, and a big reason to combine the 2. As well as I think for the senior athletes, thinking that a few of the folks that would commit to the trip would have just missed the U.S. Olympic team due to the timing, that them being around the U18s where the experience is low, but the enthusiasm is through the roof, to remember that it's not just to make teams and races and call yourself an Olympian that you do this, but because ski racing is really special and important. And those are the pieces, the memories, the trips, the times you pushed yourself in a new environment that you were unsure about going into it. Those things really, really matter. Those are make and break in your career over long periods of time. So I thought it'd be really good for the old dogs to have some new pups and for the young pups to learn from some of the older dogs.
Yeah, I love that. And that's a really great strategy that you brought to it. And, being an individual who did just miss out on the Olympic team, I did for a moment consider joining everyone on the super trip. And hearing you talk about that, I really wish I had joined you all because I think that's actually something that I really could have used the last few weeks. At the end of the day, when I found out the news that I did not make the Olympic team, I was just far too heartbroken to be around a team and to be a good team player. I needed to go and mourn that news by myself. And I think maybe if there had been a little bit more time between the news and the trip, I would have loved to have joined you guys. But one thing that is kind of cool in reflecting back on my experience with the, former OPA FESA trip that always happened in March is that, as you mentioned, I won a few years ago. And actually that win came in an Olympic year. And it was the last Olympic cycle. And, I wasn't necessarily quite as on the bubble of making the Olympic team, but I was still quite possibly going to make that Olympic team. And then I did not make it and was heartbroken and had a really tough time coming back from that, but ultimately came back around to my love of ski racing. And I went back and had some amazing super tour races, a great Berkey, and then came over and joined you for that OPA final trip, which is incredibly competitive racing. It's essentially taking all of the Central European countries, bringing them all together, and it's anyone who's not racing World Cup. And it's basically
big races. They're big races to compete in, and they're big wins.
Yeah, exactly. And, being on that trip, and obviously we were in a beautiful little town in Italy and it was sunny and gorgeous and everyone was having an amazing time and just skiing with so much joy. It's hard not to just love the sport and that when you're in that environment. And I was loving it so much. Even after that heartbreak, I came back around and loved it so much. And I think I was third in one of the races and then I won the other race. And it was that was everything I needed in that moment to kind of bring me back to life, I guess. And so I hope that there's more of that for me in the future, but also more of that for other athletes who are in a similar boat. And I just I guess like applaud you for recognizing that and presenting this opportunity for athletes who maybe need to just be around some of the young pups and see just the enthusiasm and be reminded of like how much fun ski racing can be.
Yep, type 2 fun. And it was, I mean, it's, yeah, we're missing having you here because I understand when you're heartbroken, you need what you need, and it's the right choice that you made. But we miss you here as a great teammate and asset to US skiing. Like you're a big fixture in US skiing. You've been around for a long time now, and you're very impactful and you're a great leader on the team. So just know you're missed.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll look forward to more races from you or whatever you decide down the road.
Thanks, Greta. I miss you guys,
Mm-hmm.
and I hope that you're all having a great time. But I do want to dive into more of your role with the US ski team. And so you've been with the ski team now for over 5 years, and your title is, development of cross country skiing. And I'm curious then, from your perspective, how has your role over these last many years influenced the development in junior community and the current pipeline of athletes coming up?
I think the biggest influence has been shifting like the conversation, our narrative around skiing from how fast are you right now to how well are you building yourself? And as an organization, how well are we helping athletes build themselves and coaches build athletes? So, speaking on behalf of the organization, we've tried to bring more like clarity, consistency, long term thinking into ski performance, which means better communication with clubs, coaches, parents, helping the athletes and everyone else involved understand that development is not linear and that it doesn't need to be rushed. This is a very long-term game. I think what's changed most is that we've begun to think of development as like its own ecosystem, or the buzzword we're using is pathway, and not a pipeline or something rigid with a lot of boundaries on it. So we're producing faster juniors, like a higher number of faster juniors on the world rank scale. And we're developing, like, I hope, resilient, curious, values driven people who can like sustain that excellence and the pursuit of that excellence over a decade or more. And so that shift has strengthened the entire pipeline and pathway, and created a culture where long-term success is like intentional and not accidental. And because of those environments, we hope we can replicate that experience and continue to refine it for many athletes, and that iron strengthens iron, iron sharpens iron kind of environment. So
yeah, can you give any examples of like a singular focus or a theme that you've been trying to kind of present to the US community of developing athletes? Like, is there one idea of, stay in as many sports as you can as a young athlete, or, be very disciplined, or pick cross country skiing at the age of 12 and stick with it? Like, and those are just random ideas, but like, do you have one focus where you're like, this is how we can create a sustainable career or trajectory for a young athlete?
if we were like some other nations who are producing 20 people every 3 years who can win World Cups, I would say yes. We figured it out and we're pushing that theme as hard as we can. We have not proven that we know how to do that yet. And so the athletes are in the driver's seat there, and we are making a ton of progress forward. I think intentional development is the thing that we have been really focused on. A major focus of mine has been listening to the community, right? Not just in our country, but internationally in skiing. So teaching athletes and coaches how to make smart, age-appropriate decisions while still dreaming big, not asking them to lower their ambition, but asking them to sequence it, so that we're maximizing each step along the way. So the core theme there has been sustainable excellence. How do we build athletes and systems that thrive under pressure, adapt to change, and keep getting better over time? That mindset aligns not only with like elite sport, but with high performing organizations everywhere. We want to increase the duration of athletes' careers because we know, especially in the distance skiing, it's a very long-term game. At the same time, we have that urgency of wanting athletes to be very focused on and very urgent and intentional about things like in juniors, speed development, that development of raw speed and agility, because they're in a window of time where they can build so much of that per minute put in that they won't be able to build as effectively later, even in their early 20s. And so that can be a real challenge for the athletes and coaches that work with them to balance out that patience and urgency. You have to also, as you're pursuing that and building plans and having the communication with athletes as a coach or a director, have a ton of confidence in the process and trust in it also. And like, because I'm a person who watches a lot of sports and really enjoys learning about business, I really like to see how businesses grow and the processes they use to expand their business while they stay true to their brand and what they're doing, their mission, right? And I think that carries over into coaching more than people realize, because at the end of the day, it's about performance and growth. Humans are so much more than a faceless business, but I do think that seeing the trends of what helps things grow and develop and a deep understanding of that is something that is potentially going to set us apart from other nations in the future. So it's a process that I pay attention to and take very seriously. It's our job to know that, not the job of a young athlete, but the more we know, the more sound guidance we can provide for them. And so it's really important that we're paying attention to those things. So that has been a singular focus of mine, is what does aggressive growth that is consistent over time look like?
Mhm. And I'm curious then, are you more so interacting that or trying to communicate that message with the athletes directly or with their coaches?
Both. It's not an either or. And we're
Yeah.
such a huge nation. Like when one of our regions gets together to compete, right? It's bigger geographical spread, and in some cases, a larger athlete pool than most nations getting together for their national championship.
Yeah.
So we kind of act like several ski nations, and we want each of those nations to be as strong as possible so that within what we're doing in skiing, we can all push each other and act like a mass of multiple countries working together to make sure that everyone is really strong. And we're very fortunate for that.
Yeah. Yeah. There are pros and cons of being such a massive country. One of them is that one of the cons is that you have to travel so far and we're all spread out and it's harder to bring everyone together to compete or to train together or to learn from each other. It is challenging. However, one of the pros is that like you can have kind of like these micro um communities of competition or of training and learning together, and then hopefully all come together at like a junior nationals or a summer training group for young juniors. So there are plenty of pros and cons to that all. But I'm curious, so say for example a 16 or 17-year-old comes to you at a training camp in the summer or fall, and they say, Greta, I want to make the Olympics, or I want to qualify for a World Cup. What do I have to do right now as a 16 or 17-year-old to do that?
If you're there, I'm like, yo, go talk to Elena. I mean, truly, one of my first things I say is go talk to the really high level athletes that are doing this and ask them their advice because they're living it, right? They should be learning how to build themselves. So I would encourage them to learn physically, mentally, emotionally, how to build themselves and become super learners. The most powerful skill is not their speed or their strength, it's likely their self awareness. And I
Mm.
would say that about coaches also. Athletes who are learning to train smart, recover well, and communicate openly and advocate for themselves become leaders, and leaders win over time. So, consistency, the fundamentals, doing the really boring day by day by day stuff at a level with a ton of care every day.
Mhm.
At that age, you're building habits, but you're also building your identity. So, you're not just chasing peak fitness, you're building all the things that are going to allow you to have that later on. So you will have that if you're going to be world class, but it's not just something you show up and have, even if you're what people would call a super talent. Um, you know, athletes are going to have that. Coaches are going to have that. Coaches and athletes are both going to have to be super communicators and super leaders, and both communication and leading are skills. So it's a commitment that's made on both sides of the aisle, an agreement that we make with the athletes every day at practice. If they're showing up and giving 110%, we better also be doing the same. And, every day at practice, we show up and everyone's committed and clear on what they're doing. But we expect that from our 16 and 17-year-olds that want to be, they don't have to be perfect, but they have to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you become world class.
Yeah,
And that's
showing up.
true for the 16-year-old that wins JNs by 2 minutes. And it's true for the 16-year-old that is 3 minutes back from that win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love what you said about learning how to learn. And I think that's such a valuable uh, lesson and piece of advice. And also just like when you stop and actually think about that, it is so powerful. And especially for like a 16 or 17-year-old who, yes, they go to school every day and they're learning and things, but it's like, can you put yourself in an environment where you're not necessarily being taught? And it's more so you are seeking out things to learn about yourself, about your surroundings, about how you respond to your environment, and about what other people are doing and what you could potentially do. And when
Yeah.
you really like stop and think about that, I think it's really powerful.
Yeah. Training day at 17 is not less important than a training day when you're 25.
Yeah,
They're just different.
exactly. Yeah. Well, how would you say then is that answer any different for like a 12 or 13-year-old who's maybe just starting to take skiing a bit more seriously? You know, they're in like some middle school races and they realize like, oh, I could go, you know, I could qualify for junior nationals for the first time. You know, what does that look like?
Well, the language is different. You say things like trust, and farming aura. I'm just kidding.
I don't even know
It's
what that means.
it's so cringe as I'm learning the kids say. I think at 12 or 13, it's very different and it's also very similar. The priority is joy, skill, movement literacy, but skiing, those things are best learned in the brain actually through play, right? And so it shouldn't be narrow or stressful. It should be like love of being outside. Um, you know, the performance side can come later, but all the skills need to come as soon as possible and be practiced frequently. So we see great growth and development, not just at 12 and 13, but at 22 and 23, and at 28 and 29, and at 33 to 35. Offsday Slind didn't win her first World Cup until she was 36, but
Yeah.
she's a World Cup winner. So
Yeah.
who cares? Like, she had to wait a long time, but she's there. So, and that whole time she's working, right? So, um, that huge commitment is an amazing thing to do, but it stems usually from fun. And then as you get
Mhm.
older, it stems from deep meaning. But, for any of the master skiers that happen to be listening to this, which I'm sure is many of them with the Berkey coming up,
Oh, yeah.
Jen Santoro just wrote a really nice article in her Tuna newsletter called Train Like a Junior. And I
Yeah.
would recommend you read it. And we'll get back to what we are discussing, but it was talking about how if you're inspired and you're training like you're young and you're training to develop, you'll be successful and you'll have a lot of fun along the way. So we want the young athletes to fall first and foremost in love with the process, the movement, the environment, the community, their teammates, getting to be part of a really positive culture. When that joy is protected early, the ambition grows naturally and sustainably. And then it's wired into you as being a really good part of your life.
Mhm. Yeah, I love all of that. And so I'm going to bring something else up with something that was written. Have you ever heard of the book? It's called Up to Speed.
Yes, yes, I have a copy of it yes, it's sitting on my desk at home.
So, so maybe it's you will read it, but for listeners, it's called Up to Speed: The Groundbreaking Science of Women Athletes, and it's by Christine Yu. And it's basically a book that kind of debunks these myths and uses science to explain how women athletes can achieve peak performance, and it's addressing things like puberty and menopause, and it kind of just advocates for like better research for female physiology. And it's basically talking about like bringing women in sport or female physiology up to speed with what has been studied in men's sports, because really in the last 100 years most physiology studies have been done only on men, and it's starting to turn, and we're starting to see more about physiology or studies that include women, but there's still very little that, really study like puberty or how your cycle maybe affects your training or menopause. So It's a really interesting book, I would say, for female athletes and male athletes to read because it's just so valuable. But one thing that really stuck out to me when I was reading it was actually she shares a study that shows about or it talks about sport specificity. And if you are 12 or 13 years old and you're playing hockey and you're probably, encouraged, like you need to go all in on hockey and you need to commit to hockey as your only thing because the time and energy required to become a great hockey player, like you don't have time to do anything else. And so it tries to kind of pigeonhole these young athletes into picking one sport. And what the study shows is that those athletes are phenomenal through the age of 16, 17, 18 years old. And then most often quit after the age of 18. Maybe they go on to play that sport in college, but for sure after that, most often they're done. And when you take the percentage, it's not just hockey, it's really any sport. And if you take the percentage of athletes who have committed to that singular sport and then go on to um, continue that sport through like the rest of their lives, it's very small percentage. Versus if young athletes when they're 12, 13, 14 years old and they continue to play in all of these sports and they are doing a sport every single season, it's different and it mixes things up. Yeah, they might not be like a phenom at the age of 16, but they can break through incredible performances in their 20s and much later in life. And that's how you see most, Olympians, most high performing athletes have continued to carry their other, like in their developing years, they continued to kind of play other sports and do other things. And I'm curious then, like, what your perspective is on that as someone who's trying to really advance skiing in the US. You want specificity, but also there's a study like this. So I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, thank you for asking that so I can put this soundbite out into the universe. I do think I'm pretty certain that Frida, Arald, Therese, and Johannes all played soccer when they were young. Um, I really hope that athletes will be multi-sport athletes for as long as they can. I look at Sammy, and every time that we talk to other people, they say, well, when are you going to make her commit to something? And not that we can, but Sammy is successful because she does what works for Sammy. And it's our job to fit and support her, not the other way around. And so I look at an athlete like that and I think, gosh, every time she leaves us for the soccer field, she's really happy to go to soccer and she's excited about it and she does a great job. And it seems like she's improving all the time in a nonlinear way. And when she comes back to the ski team, it seems like it does take her a few days because she's doing her first workout as a U.S. Nationals race, basically,
Yeah.
in terms of intensity. But, every year she's really enthusiastic to be there and she's excited. And in a nonlinear way, she has been faster year over year. So I think that it is, our job to kind of grab the popcorn, watch and see, not actually grab popcorn, right? But, she's faster each time. So who's to say that's not the right model? I would hope that many of the athletes that are people that consider themselves distance guys and distance girls would consider running the 800 if they're healthy in the spring and they have a little juice left in their legs, not going out and running for an hour and a half with their running team, but actually doing sprints and drills and things that Nordic skiers are not traditionally known for being good at. And the reason is it's a really hard lactate wall you hit. It's very different from what you do. It's mechanically, if you learn to move that way, quite good for you. It gives you a lot of time to stretch and do new movements that are nonlinear. And quite frankly, the 800 meter is about 2 to 3 minutes. And many of our sprints are trending to be about 2 or 3 minutes. So it's quite a good amount of time to have your heart rate super high. And I would hope that athletes will consider that because I think it's really important for their development to be doing multiple things.
Yeah. I love that
I think,
answer.
yeah. And I think in hockey and soccer and all the sports you see where they are asking kids to specify or super specify early, I respectfully take a breath and I feel like That's a business model, not a performance model,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So
Well
we're
said.
looking at performance models.
Hmm. Well, so speaking of performance models and success, is there one thing as, when you are working with these young athletes that you see some of them, the athletes might over prioritize? And then is there one thing that you see they often underestimate in either their training or racing?
Ironic, given that we use a list with times on it to compare athletes, but I feel that those athletes, quite frankly, over prioritize comparison and underestimate longevity. True success comes from building things that last, not from a winning moment, but building those things that last can lead to many winning moments. So by over prioritizing that comparison, um, progress isn't about beating your peers at 17. It's about showing up healthy and motivated at 22, 27, 34 years old. The athletes in their 30s have to do just as much work or more as the ones that are really motivated at 16. But you want to have the motivation of a really hungry 16-year-old when you're 27, because then you'll be very experienced and you'll still have the joy, right? They get better over time at the consistent parts because they have more aggregate time, reps, and data points put in. Isn't it wonderful to know that if you're on top of your game at 16 or 20 years old, you still have another decade or decade and a half that you can definitely improve, and so many things that you can work on. It's a beautiful thing in sport to not peak at 14 like
Hmm.
gymnasts did in the 90s because of the way the sport was shaped and because of the way it was judged. But you would spend the rest of your life missing the good old days. But now you can be creating those days and that improvement until you're 38 years old, as far as we know, maybe longer. And so that research that you spoke about is contributing to that. And so is our understanding of, yeah, I can maybe make you the best 18-year-old in the country with this insane 4x4 VO2 max training method. And we know
Yep.
it will increase your VO2 max. That's what the science says. But at what cost over time? And is
Right.
that important right then? Or are other things that we can work on really important for winning on the world stage? And I think that, to speak to what you said about youth sport, I think the demands of winning at 9, 12, and 13 years old are very different than the things that people have to master to be world class as adults in a sport.
Hmm.
I look at them almost as two different sports.
Yeah, I think that's super fair. I mean, yeah, looking at it as two different sports because oftentimes it's two different bodies, it's two different minds, it's two different environments. Like there's so much that has changed for me from when I was 14 years old versus now at the age of 29. It's my body has changed, my physiology has changed, my experience has changed. Like it's completely different. And so yeah, I think you said it so well. I'm curious now if we dive into kind of like more of the development years, then are there common traps that you see might derail long-term development?
Yeah, and it's so heavily related to some of the things young people are facing right now, chasing short term validation, overloading young bodies, chasing that validation, and narrowing the identity too early. I think
Hmm.
when we identify with success too much, and I actually just read a Steve Magnus clickbait or whatever
Yeah.
about this. When it becomes such a deeply tied in part of your identity, and especially for young people because their identity hasn't had a ton of time to form itself or figure out what it is by asking good questions and experimenting with things. Your performance becomes really fragile, like success becomes really fragile. And a result of that they see is that performance suffers. Our goal is to build confidence that is deeply rooted, not confidence that's reactive to outside factors. Things like overtraining, FOMO, defining success really narrowly like that, it's dangerous. And culturally, I think we get excited, and so it's with good intention that we celebrate early success without asking whether it's sustainable. And that's a trap we're like actively working and skiing to shift, because we do see better performances in people at 30 than we see at 18. But if you're only in the 18-year-old age class and you win that race, that's awesome. And we want you to win it. We want you to do really well. but because you're doing the right things, not because you're getting pushed harder than or differently than is appropriate for you at that age.
Mm-hmm. And so with those kind of right things, doing it for the right reasons, what role does joy actually play in long-term performance, and how can coaches kind of protect that without losing ambition and keep a focus on joy and fun and passion for the sport while also bringing a level of sophisticated or um, professionalism to the sport?
Joy is fuel. It's not the only fuel, but it's what sustains effort, creativity, and resilience. As brains are developing, we want to develop those pathways in the brain so that it feels really joyful. And there's many of the hormonal responses to joy that we see, right? When athletes feel inspired and supported, that ambition doesn't disappear, it accelerates. Joy is foundational. It's what carries athletes through setbacks and long winters. Um, Protecting joy doesn't mean that we're lowering our standards when we carry it into an environment or create an environment where it's experienced through things like play. It means we're building environments where effort is valued, curiosity is encouraged, and the athletes feel safe to grow. You can still have a fun day with a ton of failures in it, and failing a few times and then getting it right. There's this joy that's sparked, right? And more importantly than that, probably beyond the joy piece, is that it's meaningful, because some days you're going to get your butt kicked, and quite frankly, as you well know, it's not very fun. All these athletes will fail much more than they succeed. You see all the greats struggling with that: Roger Federer, Michaela Schifrin, Lindsey Vonn, Bodie Miller. When you see people like Simone Biles and Michael Phelps struggling with depression, you say, okay, if you rely on medals for your joy and success and world records for your joy, the rest of us are really in trouble, because most of us are not even close, right? So it's arguable that it's a pattern, that hardship is something that makes these people great, but it's also something that makes them suffer. Mm-hmm. So we know that suffering is almost a guarantee, whether you go out and find your suffering or you're somebody whose suffering finds you. I think an example in our sport, well, you gave one at the beginning of the podcast with Zapata, with your races there, coming off of a mid-season that didn't define your season, but wasn't what you wanted at that time. It was not what you hoped for, and you found that joy, and then you had it at the race, before, during, at the finish line. That was a really happy 2 weeks for all of us in that group. Some of Jessie's hardest years have also been her best from a performance standpoint. And it's also worth saying that it's a bit of a myth that youth sport, especially youth sport and adult sport, is healthy and happy and fun and joyful all the time. Mm-hmm. Sport is where we meet ourselves and we meet hardship. It's where we go seek out problems and problems find us. There's a lot of it that's hard and not joyful. And at the elite level, there's quite frankly a lot of things in sport that aren't healthy or sustainable. So we make healthy and sustainable what we can so that joy is frequent, and it's part of what we do. But it's not the only piece. The joyful clips you'll see from the Olympics are not the memories that many of those athletes will have from the Olympics. That's the television production part of it. Mm-hmm. And it's what makes the joyful moments so special. For every person you see who's disappointed at the races, at the games, I know there are 10 men and 10 women at home who realistically had shots at those starts, who are in the situation that you're in, where they're at home and wishing they could have that opportunity. So in these things that are deeply meaningful, it's important that we're grateful for them and we don't take them for granted. And again, like you said, that we connect with the joy of skiing, which is not found in a title or an amount of money or one certain accomplishment that comes and goes, but in who we are and what we do every day.
Greta, everything you are saying is just so well said and articulated in such a beautiful way. And I feel like, I mean, it hits me in a very special place right now. And I appreciate everything that you are sharing, because I think that for me, in the state that I'm in, like, it's a wonderful reminder about joy, and that we get so worked up about outcome or result. And I've been trying so hard the last few weeks to remind myself, I mean, really the last few years, to remind myself, ever since the last Olympic cycle, that it doesn't have to be all about outcome or result, and it's about the joy along the way. And that reminder has led me to make changes in my um, training, in my training group environment, in my location. Um, and because I need to constantly be seeking joy, because as you mentioned, like, sport isn't all joyful, right? It's oftentimes a place where we go and we suffer. um, and it, you need to balance that out with the joy. And um, sometimes that is easier said than done. And so I'm curious now, as we kind of transition our conversation into what's coming up in the remainder of this season. So you have these races in Sweden this weekend, and then you are also bringing or leading a trip to World Juniors and U23 championships, which are in Lillehammer at the beginning of March. And so this is a group of athletes who are roughly the age of like 18 to 22, although some younger athletes qualify sometimes. But oftentimes it is their first time experiencing international racing, or that level of international racing. And sometimes it can bring a lot of pressure, or maybe they feel pressure. Maybe it's pressure that they're putting on themselves, or whatever it might be. It can be a very intimidating experience. So I'm curious now, once you bring this group of young athletes to Norway in just over a month, how are you bringing joy to that environment? Or how are you emphasizing joy in that environment to make sure that, yes, we want them to perform well, and we want them to reach their goals, but how can you, as the trip leader and also like the leader of the staff, how can you make sure that all of the staff there kind of brings reminders throughout each day that it's about joy?
I will say, actually, you were at my first World Juniors I ever coached, which was 2019 in Lofty. You were on the U23 team.
Yeah.
And I remember that well. I was actually, John Flardo is here on our service team. And so it's been really fun because I was on the glide team led by him at that championship, as you know. And we had skis most days that were good enough to have results reflective of the athletes that were on those skis. I am truly, every year when we name that team, delighted and honored to be the one to lead it. Um, we treat those trips as leadership laboratories, if you will, or like, hey, come and learn international racing laboratories. It, for most, is their first world championship. And for many of the athletes on those rosters, it is not their last world championship. They don't know that, but I do. You will forever be one of the women that has a top 20 from a world championship that was raced in the 50K format in Trondheim last year, with the top 20 in the hardest race I've ever seen a women's field go through, frankly. That kind of grit is what we hope to build at World Juniors and U23s. Athletes learn how to prepare, perform, reflect, and grow. They're doing that on the world stage. And so it's about them becoming comfortable with the responsibility and opportunity, and how serious it is to pursue your dreams. So it's not to say that joy and fun and all these things we're talking about that are really positive mean that it is not an incredibly serious environment. It is not fun and games all the time. As you know, it is not sparkles all the time, and not cameras and all the things everyone sees on Instagram all the time. This is a job. You are showing up at your job hoping to have the best day of your professional career, and you are lining up with everyone else who wants to do the same and is also very ready. So being comfortable in an environment that's serious is really important too. And that's why it's important for those athletes when they come to this event to be super learners or to become super learners through experiences like this. Those events are about learning how to be a championship athlete, not just skiing fast. And don't get me wrong, we want to ski fast and we want to bring home medals. But that focus on preparation, the decision making, the recovery, and very importantly, the emotional regulation that these athletes are doing, quite frankly, without a fully developed brain and frontal lobe yet, is really, really quite impressive. So the racing matters, but the experience matters more, because what we're looking to do is have a great experience in terms of being high quality and set you all up for many more better things down the road, where instead of looking at that as the pinnacle of your career, you look back and say, God, that was a really awesome step along the way.
Yeah, it's cool to now reflect on my first World Juniors, which was back in 2015. And we went to Almaty, Kazakhstan. And it was the first time I had ever been out of North America. And let me tell you, it was an experience to um, to travel nearly to the other side of the world and to be thrown into a completely different environment and to then go and try to perform and also be, it was the first time I had been around Norwegian athletes, Russian athletes. It was the first time I had really been in an environment where no one else spoke English and I didn't know what I was eating. And I didn't know what time it was. It was like a 14-hour time change. I mean, it was completely absurd. And yet it was such an incredible experience for me. I don't even remember what place I got. I have no idea what my result was, but I remember all of the newness that was there for me to absorb and to see what other people were doing at that level, how they were racing, how were they recovering or eating or exploring the city when we could. And it was just one stepping stone for me to learn as much as I could and fuel me to hope to achieve more in the future then. And I went back for multiple other World Junior and U23 championship competitions. And every time I felt more and more comfortable being there and could compete at a higher and higher level. And I think sometimes, um, media might highlight the individuals who just came onto the scene as a superstar junior and get like a top 8 at World Juniors. And yeah, that's incredible. That's so cool. And that is not the norm at all. And that's not the only path that these young athletes can take either. So I'm curious then, when you have an athlete who maybe they're at their first World Juniors and they get 48th in one of the races and someone else gets a podium, how do you validate both of those experiences with those athletes?
So often the one in 48th was winning the time trial over the one in 8th in October, that
Yeah,
I'm like, hey, that's your teammate. You can do that, you
yeah,
know? Um, Process drives performance. And when athletes learn how to execute under that pressure, the results, they become repeatable over time. I mean, look at uh, from where you placed in Kazakhstan to like what you're doing now. If you had any idea the amount of progress, I'm sure you felt like you were on the top of your game. Like, how am I going to get faster? How am I going to find 10 more seconds on that course? Well, you can find 2.5 more minutes on that course. So it takes time. You got to be a little smarter picking lines. You have to be fitter. Your transitions have to get better. You have to be more technically savvy. So I think from a coaching standpoint and from what we do as a staff, both on the technician side and the coaching side, we try to empower the athletes without disappearing and saying, "Hey, you take the reins, you drive. Like we're out. We're just gonna not pay attention." Athletes need the space to take that responsibility, so it's truly theirs. But they also need to know that support is there, regardless of the result. That when it comes to experience, like we want them to get better over time. we want everybody to have top 10s, but there's only 10 spots in the top 10. There are 3 spots on the podium. For some reason, FIS podiums are 6 people deep, and nobody knows why. They just drew a line at 6. We want them in an environment where high demand, which is World Championship, uh, meets really high support, where those critical conversations and feedback are always paired with opportunities for improvement and coaches and a system that will help them see that through to the finish. We can't do the work for you. We're not going to give you the narrative that you're a victim, or let you get that narrative in your head that you're a victim when you get to do this thing that is an awesome privilege. Not to pander to you so much as because it doesn't help you perform if you feel that way. That is not a healthy narrative for performance. So the place to me is less important. An athlete being able to put together a great race where they throw it on what they have is very important. And I know that athletes that have won top 10 at Junior Worlds are athletes that can become athletes who can win World Cups. So I think that's very promising, you know.
Mm-hmm. So is there anything as we look ahead now to the upcoming World Junior and U23 championships this season? What are you excited about for the competitions coming up?
We have a ton of depth on our team. We have a lot of returners, a ton of maturity and confidence. I think athletes who qualified for the team, who on the phone call that I have had with them, or a couple of phone calls I've had with them, are like, yeah, I qualified and I'm super psyched, but I have a lot more to give. I've got more in me and I'm excited to see what that is. And so we're seeing a really strong mix of that depth and maturity, the enthusiasm from the ones where it'll be their first major championship. Athletes in general in our country are arriving more prepared, more self-directed. They're, I think, equally as uncomfortable on the world stage, but they're better at asking questions and getting themselves ready for something new. I think COVID was a positive contributor to that for those athletes. They were a certain age at that time where a lot of uncertainty was introduced, and they were along for the ride with their families probably, and everything turned out okay. And so they're a little more go with the flow with everything for the most part. They're really comfortable, I think even more so than we are sometimes, my generation anyway, with that uncomfort and level of chaos that feels like is inevitable when you head to a new place where you don't know anyone else on the start list, you know, maybe 3 other people. So I think that's really promising. You know, us having at Lake Placid US Nationals, we had the largest fields we've ever had at US Nationals.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Mostly juniors, and I'm really proud of that as a nation. You know, we asked coaches to like step up and run more training sessions and said, hey, if you guys run training 5 or 6 days a week, athletes will show up. Encourage them to keep training logs. Like, and I am really proud of the coaches in our country who have stepped up and done that, because it's really cool. We can see it when we look over the numbers and stuff, and that's very promising.
That's
it's an
super
exciting
cool.
time. Yeah, it's a really exciting time, and especially with all of you performing well on the World Cup consistently. Everyone has someone from their hometown or nearby that's on the World Cup that they know, where they have a pony in the race, and they're like, if they can do that, like maybe someday, like what is she doing? What's Elena doing that like I can do? I met her at the Berkey. She's so cool. Like, you know, I saw that she put her pant leg over her boots and was skiing, and so that's why I do that, you know. And I think that those little things, while they feel small, when you're young, they're hugely impactful.
Yeah. I mean, a perfect example is that when I was in middle school and high school, I had a poster of Keegan Randall and Jesse Diggins on my wall. And then I get to go on and race with them years later and race at a level that I never really like, you know, I thought was cool. And I was like, that would be amazing. And I didn't really, you know, like I believed in it, but at the same time, I didn't really believe in it until it happened. And so it is, yeah, just cool to see. Like, again, that's kind of something that I keep coming back to in the position that I'm in right now, where I did not make the Olympic team, but then getting to spend more of my time and energy kind of giving back a little bit more right now. And, you know, I got to hop on a call a few days ago with my former high school team and the girls who are racing for my high school this year. And they're getting ready for the Minnesota State high school meet, which is arguably a bigger deal than the
The
Olympics.
biggest,
So
that and the
they're under
burpees.
they're under a lot of pressure right now. Um, but it was so cool to then get to chat with them about it and yeah, just see like the young athletes who are coming up and the level of focus that they bring. And I think that stems from the, I guess, messages and strategies that you are bringing to these coaches, to these camps, to these um, racing and training environments. And so I just thank you for like all of the messages that you're kind of putting out into the world for these young athletes to develop. I'm curious now if there's one area that you feel like if you could change or strengthen just one part of the pipeline tomorrow and just like snap your fingers and it's done, what area would you try to really strengthen?
What we do is so multifaceted. I'm not going to sidestep your question, but this is incredibly difficult for me to choose. I would say coach support and education because
Mm-hmm.
I deeply believe that great athletes come from great environments. All of these athletes we see that are successful have a club, or some of them, it's a single coach or one person they interacted with, one teammate they had that anchor them and are their family and their home in their like ski world that make them so good. And I think great environments start with supported, informed coaches. So I would increase our investment in people, in coaches, mentors, environments. I believe and I have seen that's where transformation happens. I have personally had that experience at my home clubs and with my home coaches, which I am very thankful for. Um, I, yeah, it's deeply impactful, the personal connection that makes or breaks this entire process, can really get the ball rolling or course correct the times that it needs to be course corrected. The other piece that I would encourage junior athletes to pursue and be aware of is, if I could add one more thing into the mix, is that they increase their business acumen, because there's the performance of sport and there's the business of sport, and the two don't happen in vacuums. We're not a
Mm-hmm.
large enough sport right now as individual sport that most people are fully funded. The financial and logistical pieces of being outside of a team or even being on a smaller team are quite large hurdles to navigate. And so I think that that component of it, even if athletes can take a business or marketing class or two in school, and understand that, yes, they're a person and an athlete, and those pieces are important, but also, yes, they're a business and a brand, and they need to find a way to make this sustainable so that they leave on their own terms when they're ready, and not because they had things outside of sport performance that they struggle to navigate. I think would increase the longevity in careers for many athletes.
On the flip side of that, is there one thing that you would love for junior athletes to maybe retire, or maybe there's like a myth about junior development that you'd love to just kind of like get rid of?
Every year we have the Super U16, and heavy is the head that wears the crown. And you've been around the block long enough to know this always happens, and the market always recalibrates itself. And what we want is strong generations of skiers. So on the individual level, one myth about junior development that I'd love to retire is that success has to be rushed. The strongest outcomes are built with intention and patience, and that is true for every athlete. The idea that early success predicts elite success, it does not. We know from meta-analysis that we're terrible human beings in general, or Western culture, we're terrible at predicting sport performance when we correlate it with like youth sport with the elite level. Um, we know what's required, I think, to be really good at the junior level or youth level. But I don't think enough people realize that that's very different than the demands of professional and world-class sport elite level or adults. And people hate admitting that, but we while we can't predict success in people, that opens the door for us to say that we can and we do know what kinds of environments predict success. And we can repeat those patterns that make for developmental success across the board. So those patterns and statistics are much more predictable for us, which means that we want to put as many people, in my case, young skiers, in those situations as we can, only because we know that it helps to build success, and also because those environments are really culturally positive for everyone who is contributing to them. And if you're part of them, you are contributing to them. It better be for positive when you say contributing, because things grow in one direction or the other. They're never stagnant. So if you're not a positive contributing part, you're on the other end. And so you got to make some choices, right? But that idea that success has to be rushed and that our top 19-year-old becomes our top 29-year-old is very often not the case. And that's not just for the United States. That's in many, many ski nations.
Mm-hmm. So one major aspect of the junior development is the home environment that these young athletes are in as well. And there can be incredibly positive home environments when it comes to parental encouragement. And then that encouragement can sometimes get to the point where it becomes toxic. And I've seen parents get hyper focused on some of the success. And this isn't every parent, but some parents don't even know how to look up the results. And they're just like, "Oh, did you have fun?" You know, and there's everything in between. But I'm curious if you could speak directly to the parents of developing athletes and completely unfiltered. What would you tell them?
Your kid gets to do this one time. It's a small window of time and they won't get to do it again. Enjoy it. You know, it's an exciting time and it can be overwhelming for you, just like it is for them, because everything's new. Sport is such an opportunity for them to get to explore who they are and who they're going to be. And oftentimes that person is not exactly who you project or think they are or are going to be. So you have an opportunity to get to know that person. You can enjoy it along with them, but you can't do it for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes it great. So your role as a parent, and I'm going to also include in here that I am not a parent. I don't have children. And my mom once told me, Greta, the easiest parenting or the best parenting you ever do is before you have kids. And then rolled her eyes at me. So your role is to support the person, not to manage the athlete. If your child feels safe, supported, excited to ski, you're doing it right, and the rest will unfold in time. When high support meets high demand in an environment with a lot of opportunity and not an overwhelming amount of opportunity, when your kid has agency and ownership in something, they're first going to make a lot of mistakes because they have no experience, and they are not going to want to listen to you when you're giving your very well-meaning and probably sound advice. It's probably accurate, but they probably don't want to hear it. But great things are going to happen over a duration of time. So when your child, who in this context is one of our athletes, feels supported, inspired, empowered, we all get to be part of them getting to build something that is far bigger than them in their athletic career. With them in the driver's seat, you're building a future leader. You get to help be part of that. They've got to do it. That's where the leadership part comes in. And that is something worth believing in. When you do the work for your kid, the underlying message that they get is that you believe that they can't. Now, when they were 3 years old and 5 years old, you were right about that. They could not pour the milk themselves without spilling it. But now they're a young person, a young adult. And so you've got to sit back, relax, let go of the reins, and enjoy the show, because they're in a very safe arena to have failures in. And it is scary for them, and it is scary and hard for you because you have this precious life and you never want to see it suffer or have hardship or experience failure, because you care about them and you know how much that hurts. But you have to let them do it, and they will surpass your wildest expectations. They want to hear you love them, you're proud of them, and that they need to do their homework, because those are consistent things. It becomes work that they do that is deeply meaningful on the hardest days and on the days where things come easily. You get to be part of that, for better, for worse. Make sure, as much as you can, that you're a really positive part of it, which sometimes means dealing with things that you have to grow from. And that can be a really beautiful thing that you get to experience, getting to be along to watch and experience their athletic career.
That was beautiful.
That's what I'd say.
Well, Greta, thank you so much for your time today. I have loved getting to chat with you about all of this. I have one final question for you, and that is, when you look 2 to 5 years down the road, what do you hope the U.S. development system looks like for skiing?
I want it to be recognized globally as a model for sustainable excellence, a system that produces world-class athletes that are also thoughtful, resilient leaders. We want to build a system that's aligned with our mission, values, both personally and at the organizational level, ones that are aligned, transparent, athlete-centered. And I hope that in 2 to 5 years and beyond, we become a system known for developing consistently those resilient, thoughtful, world-class people over time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Greta. Do you have any final words or anything else that you want to share with us today?
Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for caring about U.S. ski development. It truly is something that we are all involved in, and it's going to take all of us on deck to continue to be successful.
Well, I'm excited for the future of ski racing in the U.S. and I just can't wait to see what the juniors and U23 athletes do in Lillehammer in just over a month, and who the next young crop of athletes is going to be and how they develop. And I absolutely will not be able to hang with all of their Gen Z slang terms that you already threw at me. You're more well
Don
versed in this
Flardo
than
has been using ChatGPT to translate.
Okay, so what does this mean?
Yeah.
Do you have anything that you can share with us? What are they saying that you or John had to look up that like what does this mean?
I learned one last year that was Risley Bear. So I thought that was
Okay.
funny. Farming Aura is a big one. There's like a dance move.
Oh,
I don't know. They're all so
okay.
cringe. Yeah, and that's another term. So
Yeah, there we go. Okay. Well, we can help foster high level and joyful ski racing. I cannot foster Gen Z slang terms or trends, so I'm at a loss there. Thank you, Greta, so much for your time. And yeah, I just can't wait to see what comes next.
thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Extra Blue, and thank you, Greta, for joining me on the podcast. It's so fun to think back on all the times Greta has had an impact on my journey and development as an athlete, and I really can't wait to see what this next generation has in store for us. Under the leadership and guidance from Greta, this next generation will be competing at World Junior and U23 Championships in Lillehammer, Norway, March 2nd through the 8th. Please join me in cheering for these young athletes in just a few weeks.